Be careful what you mess around with, God has a way of destroying all of your plans. Good morning. I'm so glad to be with you guys today. Most of you know that I'm a teacher, right? I think that's pretty common knowledge. Probably assume that I teach Bible. Sometimes we're not sure what our pastors do on their free time, but they have jobs. All of our pastors do because no one gets paid here. But did you know that I actually teach economics? Isn't that weird? I teach economics to high school seniors, government and econ. I'm that guy of that class you hated. Isn't that weird? And I hate it too. So don't worry. Whoever the teacher of economics was, they didn't like it either. But I teach economics. Isn't that weird? I also teach Bible. Now next year I'm not going to. We've brought Pastor Mark into our school actually, so he'll be that guy who's teaching economics, which makes sense. He has a business degree. I was a child development major in undergrad, and then I have a Bible degree in graduate school. So that makes a lot of sense to be an econ teacher, right? But somehow I managed to. I don't know if you can ever remember all the way back to your high school or your econ class, or do you care to remember that? But I want to throw out a term to you today from that econ class, my favorite section of the econ class, where we study about opportunity cost. Anyone ever hear that thing? No, that sounds just as bad from here as it did when you were in high school, right? Opportunity cost. Well, opportunity cost is a key concept in economics, and it's been described as expressing the basic relationship between scarcity and choice. Opportunity cost is really how people decide to do things, or one of the things they use to decide to do things. Opportunity cost is the value, which is sort of the opposite of the way we think of something. Normally we think of like if I'm going to do something or buy something or use my resources on something, I always think of the benefit. Like if I'm going to get a new car, yeah, I'm going to look cool and I'm going to drive fast unless it's a Toyota, and then I'm going to drive medium and not look that cool, So you always normally look at the benefit, but opportunity cost is the idea that whenever you choose something, by choosing that something, you're necessarily going to lose out on something else. And so what is the value you're going to lose by making choice A over choice B? So for example, if I have $10 and it's my last $10, I can spend that $10 on a pair of socks instead of buying lunch that day. And so the opportunity cost would say that the benefit is that I get a comfy new pair of socks, but the cost is that I would go hungry that day. So whenever you choose one thing, that means by necessity of choosing one thing, you're not going to be able to spend that resource on something else. So that's opportunity cost. The question with opportunity cost is always this. The question is always, was it worth it? Did the benefit of that thing outweigh the cost? So if I only skip one meal and I have a comfy pair of socks that I can wear for a whole year, does the benefit of that outweigh the cost of what I had lost out by not spending my money on lunch? And if it were one meal, perhaps the answer is yes. But it's got to be something that we sort of think about. Now, normally when we talk about resources and scarcity in economics, we're talking about money or gold or oranges or something like that. But the commodity or the resource that I want to talk about today is not commodity like gold or oranges, but rather your time and your energy. So as human beings, we have a limited amount of time and we have a limited amount of energy. You can't do everything. You can't, be everywhere. And so with that limited energy, we've got to make decisions. So we only have a limited amount of those two personal resources. So every time we say yes to something, there is always an opportunity cost. Every time we say yes and yes and yes to something, there's always a cost to that. And I would say that in life, sometimes we say yes too often. So today's sermon is really going to focus on giving you the power to be able to say no to stuff. And it seems sort of contrary almost as like, why is the pastor telling me to say no to a bunch of stuff? But really what we're going to talk about today is saying no to things. Because I think that we say yes a little bit too often. Because in life you can either go left or right, you can't go both. By making decisions and choices, you necessarily are not going to experience something. And so if my boss asks me to work late on Monday night, and I say yes to that, but that means by necessity that precludes my ability to go to my kids' swim lessons on Monday night if I say yes to working late. So opportunity cost forces us to ask the question, is that worth it? Is the value that I'm going to gain from working late Monday night and getting some money and being able to provide a little bit more for our family, is that cost outweigh the benefit, or Does the benefit of that outweigh the cost of missing my kid's swim lesson? And it's easy often to say, sure it is, because that's boring anyway if you've ever been to swim lessons. Unless they're drowning, there's no excitement going on. Put your hand on the wall, it's not an exciting thing if you haven't experienced swim lessons. They're not that fun. So we're going to work with this concept today and really look at the power and the importance of saying no, because it will help us to see the cost of what we're giving up whenever we say yes, the big N-O. I would say that we need to use no more often. I think you need to be ruthless with the word no. And sometimes we're not. Sometimes we say yes, and you say yes out of obligation, or you feel bad, or you feel awkward, and you say yes to too many things. And as a church, I want to give you the permission to say no to a whole lot of things. The funny thing about yes is, if you say yes to too many things, it actually ends up being a no, because you're like kind of doing this one and kind of doing this one and kind of doing this, and all people get is crap out of you. You might as well not have come, because you really didn't put that much energy into it anyway. And so if you say yes to too many things, it really is just like a different way to say no, and then you let people down even more than if you'd have just said no in the first place. And so if you're spread too thin, no one gets a very good you. They don't get a good job out of you. And so I want you to say no to tons of things. I want you to be free to say no all the time. And we're going to talk about 4 areas that we're going to say no in today. So I want you to say, I want you to figure out what's really important to you. And I want you to say yes to a few things and no to a lot of things. You see, saying no opens the opportunity to say yes. The more things that I say no to, then when something that's important comes along, I have the time and the resources, the energy, when we're talking about personal time and energy, then I have the resources and the personal energy to say yes to the things that are important. If I've said no to a bunch of stuff, but if I've said yes to a bunch of stuff, then I'm not going to have any internal resources to say yes to the thing that's actually important. So you see, saying no opens the opportunity to say yes. So I'm going to give you permission to say no by the power vested in me by God in the state of California. That's how we do weddings, and now the Catholics, you're all covered. So everyone has the permission to say no in all sorts of areas. I'm going to talk about 4 specific areas where we need to say no. And the first one perhaps will be a little shocking. I want you to learn to say no to ministry and service. That's at church I'm saying this. Isn't that great? I just told you by the power vested in me, God and Father in the state of California, that you have the permission to say no to all sorts of ministries and services. You must say no when it comes to ministry and service. Man, but it's so hard. Oh, the babies need someone, the kids need to do help with the building the thing, right, Danny? Someone always has something where they want you to do something. And I want to be clear and say that you should say no to lots of things. Now let me be clear again about this. Every single one of you must, that's not should, can, could, must be serving in some way. And not just serving in the theoretical sense of serving. Every single one of you must be serving this body of Christ, if this is your church, if you're a member of here. In some way, in some capacity, every single person that's in this room, if you're calling this church your church, then you need to be serving at this church in some way. It's not actually an option, it's a mandate. Our local church body is deficient if you do not use your gifts. So we use this verse all the time, but it's apropos here. In 1 Peter, Peter tells us, each of you should use whatever gift you've received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. So if you are not serving this church, God's grace cannot go out in the same way. Does that make sense? So God's ability to minister and to love and to bring people to wholeness and health and well-being is truncated when you're not serving in your giftedness area. So God's given every single person the ability and then the opportunity to serve in some way at the local church. And this is a requirement. So I don't want to say oh, no, you shouldn't be serving. But I am saying you should say no to all sorts of serving opportunities. Saying no to things that are not your passion or your ability area or your giftedness. And that will free you up to say yes to the thing that you're actually good at. Yes to the thing that God is calling you to do. Now, hear me again, because I don't want to miss the point. God is telling every single one of you, without fail, that you must be serving this actual church, IFBC, if this is your church. You have got to be serving. There's no excuse whether you have kids or too many jobs or too many stuff. God says every single person in this room, including myself, needs to be exercising their gifts, absolutely, at this church. But I do not want you to be serving in a place that you're not gifted in. I don't want you to serve in a place that you're guilted into. We've allowed you freedom in this church to say no to all sorts of stuff and find your passion areas. A healthy church demands that people say no. See, a healthy church isn't a church that says, like, oh, we really need help in this. Please, can you do it? Well, I'm not good with kids. I don't really like kids. Yeah, but just do it anyway. Because we have this need. And you're like, oh, God doesn't love you if you don't, and like you're going to hell and like all this stuff that like, I don't know if you've heard all these pressures, but if you've been in church long enough, you'll feel some pressure from the children's department to teach a children's group or the youth department to be a youth teacher. Like that just comes like, don't you love VBS? You got to serve. You're like, oh, no, I hate VBS. I hate kids. I hate being with kids. Then you should say no. And I want to give you that opportunity to say no. Everyone should be allowed to say no. And so we need to allow people at this church to say no. To the things they're not passionate about in order to say yes to the things that God created them to do. Yes, we should be serving, but no, we shouldn't be serving everywhere. Jesus said no to ministry work. Check this out from Mark. It's very early in the morning and it's dark and Jesus is out and he's praying. He gets up, leaves his house, and he's praying alone. And Simon and his companions wake up. Jesus is not there. All these people are like crowded around. They want to see Jesus. Like tons of people. Some of the crowds for Jesus were 10,000 plus people. So his disciples are like, boom, there's crowds coming. Jesus, come on out. Wait, where's Jesus? And he's not there. And they're like looking around. They show up to his favorite mountain spot, his prayer spot up in the mountain. They come up there and they're like, dude, what are you doing? And they exclaimed. Exclaimed is like, whoa, like big one, right? But they exclaimed like, everybody's looking for you. Come on, we made it. There's crowds waiting for you, Jesus. They're like, what are you doing up here by yourself? And Jesus says, hey, let's go somewhere else. They're like, we just got the crowds. I mean, it's like, dang, church just exploded. You know what? I'm going somewhere else. He's like, let's go somewhere else to like another village, maybe nearby, so I could preach there also. That's why I've come, you guys. He said, those people that are gathered, they already heard me yesterday. This whole week I've been talking to them. That's why they're gathered. They want to kind of hear again. But they already heard it. My purpose isn't just to stay there with them. My purpose is to preach. You see, Jesus says no to a ministry opportunity of what thousand amount of people we don't know. He says no to a ministry opportunity for a crowd of people so that he can do what God called him to do. What his purpose is, and that's to preach the gospel to people who hadn't heard it. So he didn't get caught up even though there was this huge crowd of people waiting. And I can tell you as a pastor, if there is a crowd of people waiting and there is a lonely village where no one might show up, I'll tell you where the temptation lies. To stay with the crowd of people. But Jesus says no to this ministry opportunity for a lot of people because he has a purpose and a focus and he knows what he's doing. He knows what's more important. See, if he had said yes to go to these people that are in the crowd, that would have meant the opportunity cost would have been that he's not going to preach to nearby villages. And he says, you know what, it's not worth it. These people have heard me already. I'm going this way. When a church a few weeks past, believe it or not, asked me to come and pastor there for $50,000 a year, I said no. I don't want big crowds. I want life. That's why I'm here. I think those opportunities are, wow, wouldn't that be easier? I could quit my teaching job, no longer have economics. Big church, lots of resources. No, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in being here because I think God's called me here. I hope so. One guy likes that I'm here. The rest of you, I'll give you the name of the big church. You could go there. But, that's true in real life. So I would say even ministry opportunities you got to say no to sometimes so that you can do something that you think that God has called you to. So Jesus says no a lot to people, ministry opportunities, and he tells some people no. And I was really moved by this. I've read this passage 1,000 times. I don't know why yesterday. I almost cried as I was reviewing this, and this was really weird. So I even told my wife, look at this, babe. Why is this emotional? And she's like, I don't know. And she went back to the kitchen. You got problems. So Jesus, he met this one guy. This guy, he was living in a graveyard because people couldn't control him. He was demon possessed by a bunch of demons, so a legion of demons. I don't know, what's that, 100, 1,000? A lot of demons had possessed this guy, and that really sucks. If you've ever seen any demonic possessions, that's like a really crappy thing. And so this guy was possessed by demons, and people tried to even like grab him and chain him up, but they couldn't. He was too crazy. And so he decided, the demons decided, this poor guy is out living in a graveyard. He tears all his clothes off. He's running around naked in a graveyard. That's not really weird, right? Can you imagine if, you were demon-possessed and you don't want to live in a graveyard, and you don't probably want to be naked. And he's, grabbing stones, and the Bible says he cuts himself all the time. So he's like one of those teen angst girls, and he's like gender identity, all these problems, And so, he's out here demon-possessed, running around tombs. And I was thinking about that guy, oh man, that's so crappy. And Jesus shows up and he casts the demons out, and the guy's in his right mind. He gets dressed, he's like, thank you, clothes. He's like all happy. And this is how this ends. It's really crazy. Because the man whom the demons had gone out, this is recorded in Luke, the man whom the demons had gone out, he begged to go with Jesus. But Jesus said no. And he sent him away. He said, return home. Tell how much God has done for you. So the man went away and he told all over the town what Jesus had done. Can you imagine? The guy his life was destroyed. And Jesus, the Son of God, was on earth. And he said, he's begging him, let me go with you. Let me be I want a discipleship program. That's what I want to be part of. Please, Jesus. And Jesus says, no. You can't join my discipleship program. But you can join the evangelism program. So what the guy wanted, Jesus even says no to that. And he says, I got something different for you. Jesus says no to the opportunity, the service or the ministry of following Jesus, so that the guy can be free to go do evangelism and share about what Jesus had done for him. So his purpose was to be a missionary or evangelist, not just a disciple. Or you might think I could have been one of the 12, but he's one of the first missionaries called by Jesus to go out and share what he's been doing. Isn't that crazy? So he heals this demon-possessed guy, and the answer is no. See, not everybody is created to do the same thing. We all shouldn't be in the children's group. Some people should be in the band. Some people should be doing all sorts of stuff. But each of us must say yes to our purpose in Christ and be willing to say no to all the other things. See, we as a church will be deficient unless every single person says yes to their passion area. And undoubtedly, this is going to disappoint some pastor who asked you to come help them, or it may disappoint some teacher, it may disappoint some person if you say no to ministry opportunities, unless our church agrees that it's okay to do that. See, I agree, and our pastors agree, that it's okay for you guys to say no if we ask you to do something. And that way you don't have to feel guilty or shame or remorse because you didn't help out in the youth group. It's okay. We give you full freedom to say no to stuff. We're not going to hold it against you or begrudge it as long as you are serving and following God in your passion area. As long as you're pouring into this community in the way that God has gifted you. I give all our church members the freedom to say no because I love you. And you are more important than any of the programs that we run. You need to follow your passion. When I first became a Christian, I said yes to everything. I was trying to think about it just the other day. I was going to 2 midweek Bible studies that weren't even at the church I was attending. I had a weekly small group and an accountability group. I went to 2 on-campus ministries, Navigators and KCF, or M, I don't know whichever one. They're the same thing, right? I was serving on Friday nights. I was serving in 2 services on Sunday, and then I went to a Sunday service. I also, before church started, I went early and set up chairs. I went on every missions trip available, and I went to all the retreats. I helped out in the homeless ministry. I was playing on all the church sports teams. I couldn't say no. And you know how that works out. If any of you have ever been on that when you first became a Christian, or you gave into the pressure because you were young and you said yes to everything, and you're at the end of this thing going like, oh my gosh, I'm going to die. And luckily I didn't burn out because I'm tough like that, you know. But God really showed me, hey, you need to dial this back. And so I said, okay, I don't like homeless people. Buy homeless ministry. Phew. I didn't really like that small group, the KCM one, so I'm not going to that one anymore, you know. I do like attending service. I do feel gifted and called to be with kids at the time where I was pastoring. And so I said yes to that one, and I said no to another group. And so I started to say no to stuff. And it gave me freedom to be useful in the areas God called me to be. And so I want to encourage you to say no to a whole ton of things so you can say yes to the important things. All right, that's the first area I want to talk about this no deal. The next one is with family and work. So I want you guys to say no to work. Now, I'm not saying don't work, but I'm saying say no to work. In fact, you must work, the Bible says. Paul tells the church of Thessalonica, because there were some people who were like, dude, I'm not working. I'm going to live off the generosity of these Christians. And then Paul writes to them and he says, when I was with you, there was a rule, and this rule is still in effect. The one who is unwilling to work is unwilling to eat. So that's what Paul says to this church where they said, like, yeah, I guess I'm just going to freeload off all the other Christians. And Paul said, no, that's wrong. You must have a job. I'm not saying you shouldn't work, but you have to be willing to say no to the race for more so you can say yes to the race for the more important. That's hashtag another kick-ass quote from Pastor Sam Tonzek. My 3 followers recognize that from yesterday. That was a sneak preview. I did because I didn't know how to link them, so I actually reposted it on Facebook. With our work, we gotta be important to. We gotta think about, like, I gotta say no to some point. I want you to work and work and work, but there's some point where you just gotta start to say no to some stuff, so that you can say yes to the more important stuff. Otherwise, you're gonna get trapped at work all the time. The work is never gonna let you leave. They would love to own you. That's slavery. They love it. They want slavery back. All businesses do. They don't want employees. They want slaves. And if you could work for free, they would say yes to that. And so you've got to learn to say no to them instead. Don't confuse, and this happens at work all the time, don't confuse the urgent with the important. Work is like that. Oh, this has got to be done by, it's urgent. Really? Capitalism will collapse if I don't do that. Pyramids will fall, like the sun will stop shining. No, it's probably not that important. And everything at work is always urgent, got to do it now, tomorrow. And so we've got to be able to say, no, I'm going to do the important things, not the urgent things, because the urgent will always crowd out the important, because they seem like you got to do it. But in reality, you probably don't got to do it. Do you have friends like this? They think, man, you got to come down here right now. And you get down there and they're like, yeah, I'm painting my room. Why? Well, in 3 weeks I have my cousins coming over. Are you kidding? I drove down here right now. You said it was urgent now. We have several people like that at this church that I love dearly, and I don't ever go down when they ask me to go down and help them because it's not that urgent. And so don't get confused with the urgent, with the more important. Except I think for our church, with all the Facebook fun I see you guys always having, I think you probably need to work more, actually, at this church. It doesn't seem to be a lot of work. Devin's in the pool. Jason's over here at the game. Glenn was at there. I was like, geez, don't you guys people work? Like, go work. Facebook is lies, or you guys aren't working very hard. My son Andrew was asking, hey, Dad, why don't you get a higher paying job? And so after being slightly offended, I was like, punk, dude. So after slightly offended, I explained to him why I chose teaching, so that I could have enough time to spend with my kids and also be a pastor. Because if I had another full-time job and I worked all the way till 6, and then I tried to pastor, and then I'd miss time with my kids. And so I was explaining to him that sort of part. I was explaining to him my day ends at about 1:30 or 2. I have to finish some stuff at school, but I get out pretty early. Now, there's a downside to that, the pay, but, the upside is that I get to go to every single event of my kids. I don't miss anything. And if my kids, sometimes they have like lunch with Dad, I say, you need to cover my whatever period I'm supposed to be teaching that, because I'm going to go to lunch with my kids at school. I'm going to the stupid school picnic. All that stuff is not fun, My kids aren't here, so thank you for taking them out today. But that stuff sucks, But you go because I love my kids, and so by choosing the job that I chose, then I have the ability to be with my kids. We as a family weighed the opportunity cost of a higher paying job and decided that it wasn't worth it, that the value of spending time with our kids was more important. And I think that we need to do that. We need to weigh the opportunity cost of spending more time at work. I'm not saying not work, but that extra work or that little bit more or that second trip that you should take or they're asking you to take or could you take or we really need you down here. It's urgent, Mm-hmm. So you got to weigh that value. So yes, work, but really I want to introduce the concept to no at work so that you can be freed to say yes to other things. All right, the third area out of 4 I want to talk about is with your friends and with your parents. So first I said in-laws because I don't want to talk about my parents, but your parents or your in-laws or your friends, these kind of people who aren't your children or immediate family, they're like the second tier of people that are really important. And it's okay to say no to your parents and friends also. Unless you're a minor, then you can't say no to your parents. I mean, Jesus does it for his own mom. His mom and brother show up and they're like, hey, we want to see Jesus, and I can't get near because of the crowd, so they apparently send some small person to weasel in and say, hey, your mom and brothers are here. I go out and talk to them, and Jesus doesn't. He stays put, and he says, my mother and brothers are those who hear God's word and put it into practice. And so Jesus says, look, I know my mom is interested in talking to me right now, but I'm doing something else. And so I'm going to say no to her. And he does it for people too, even his own friend group. Someone urgently calls him because his friend is sick, and Jesus says, no, I'm not going down there because there's something else that I'm doing. I have this different purpose. And so Jesus says no to his friends, and he says no to even his parents. Now, he doesn't not love his mom. We see it when he's being crucified. Literally, he tells one of his best friends, hey, that's your mom now. Take care of her. And Mom, that's your new son. And so he's literally dying naked on a cross and oh, wait, I need to take care of my mom right there. So it's not that he doesn't love her. It's that there are times when you need to say no to even people that are important, your parents and your friends. And I know we're worried about getting our feelings hurt, but it's okay, you guys. Now that we're big boys and big girls, other people are in charge of their own feelings. You're not in charge of your parents' feelings. You're not in charge of your friends' feelings. You're in charge of your feelings. You're in charge of your relationship with God, but you're not in charge of theirs. And so just because you say no to them, they get their feelings hurt, that's an issue that they need to deal with, not an issue that you need to deal with. Do you understand? And that's hard to do, though, because we don't feel that way. We see our friends, we feel bad for them, and our parents, and we always say yes to everything our parents ask, but sometimes it's important to say no to our parents. Especially our lives are stretched pretty thin. They're busy, super busy. You can't possibly meet with every friend that you have. You can't do all that your parents or in-laws ask of you, not without some repercussions in other parts of your life, the opportunity cost. And so you've always got to weigh with your friends and your parents, is meeting with them or doing whatever they need me to do, is that benefit going to outweigh the cost? Because there's going to be a cost to that because I have a limited amount of time and resources and energy. Okay, so we have come to this realization that we can't do everything. Do you hear me? You guys can't do everything. You're not God. We're not the Holy Spirit. It's not your job to be omnipresent. It's God's job. So give him back his job, please. You don't have to be there for everyone. You don't have to do everything your parents ask you to do. Let God be God sometimes. Stop trying to be omnipresent. We don't have to respond to every comment from our 473 Facebook friends. Or like every picture, or even retweet amazing quotes that you get. It's okay to say no to some of those things. Turn them off. It's okay to say no to your friends. I know, is that back at that? I don't, if you know me well, I don't answer my phone a lot of times. We made it a rule at our house that we never answer the phone or we don't touch any electronics at the dinner table. But also, I sometimes am just sitting there doing nothing, and some of you call me, and I don't answer the phone. Full disclosure. Doesn't mean I don't love you. I love you, but I'm resting, or I'm playing a game, or I'm sitting there looking at my kids, and I don't really want to talk to you. And it's okay. Doesn't mean I don't love you. So I say I own the phone. The phone doesn't own me. It's okay to say no to phone calls. It's all right. I give you permission. If I call you, why didn't you? I'll text you then. Why don't you call? Pick up your phone. Da, 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 da. You know, sometimes Pastor Steve Oak does this really well. He never answers his phone or answers his text. So when it's really important, we text Sarah. We say, Sarah, can you tell Steve to look at his text? And then 10 minutes later, what? My wife said I had to look at text. You know, like. So he's really good at this no part, and I want to encourage you guys to be good at that as well. Look, I don't go to birthday dinners with my friends sometimes. It's okay. Doesn't mean I don't love them. I don't attend, every event. That's all right. They'll still be friends. They'll still love you. And if they won't, then they're probably not very good friends anyway. And the last area I want to encourage you to say no to is to haters and hurters. And this is going to sound maybe weird at first. But you have got to say no to people in your life who are just haters. There's negative people in life, and there are people that hurt you. Not like, but there's people that hurt who you are as a human being, and you've got to learn to say no to them. And this is really weird because it seems contrary to Christianity almost, but I'm going to tell you it's not. Jesus says he comes in the courts where he was teaching, and these priests show up, and they ask him some questions. By what authority are you doing these things? And who gave you the authority to teach this way? And Jesus says, well, I'll ask you a question then. If you answer me, then I'll answer you. John's baptism, was it from, where did it come from? Was it from heaven or was it from human? And they had a little debate. If we say from heaven, then he's going to ask, why didn't you believe him? And if we say from human, then people will freak out because they love John the Baptist. And so they answer Jesus, we don't know. And Jesus says, well, I'm not going to tell you then by whose authority that I'm doing these things. You see, these guys were haters. They weren't interested in getting information. They weren't interested in learning or growing. They're just asking to try to trap Jesus. And he recognizes that. And he says, you know what? I'm not going to answer your question. I'm not going to do what you want me to do. I'm not going to act in the way that you want me to act as a hater. Because you're not genuinely interested in this. And so as Christians, you say, well, shouldn't we love our enemies, though? But saying yes to their every demand and horrible action doesn't demonstrate love. If you love someone, you don't say yes to them all the time. Ask my kids. I say no all the time. Can we go to, no. Can we? No. Whatever. I don't even care what the second part of the sentence is. The answer is no. Could we? No. They're going to say, whether it's swimming or the store or candy or ice cream or whatever you're going to ask, the answer is no. You can't go to the movies. You can't go to the, we're not doing that. We're going home and you're going to bed because I love you. And so saying no doesn't mean that you don't love them. They say, come on, Daddy, you don't love us. Oh, shut up, go to bed. You love TV more. Yes, go to bed. I have a program at 8:30, so you guys need to be in bed. I don't have TiVo, so I got to watch it right on time, you know. And so, look, if you're surrounded by haters, it may be time to say no to some of them. For your benefit as well as for their benefit. It's not helpful for them to just dump on you. And also hurters. When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased. This was after Jesus had been with Pontius Pilate. He's about to get crucified. And Pilate sends him over to this other guy, Herod, who's kind of a jerk. Herod's like, oh, goody, Jesus is here. Because for a long time he wanted to see him because he was hoping to see him do a monkey trick, like a miracle. When he heard about him, he had hoped to see perform some sort of sign of some sort. So he plied him with many questions. But Jesus, he didn't answer him. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were standing there vehemently accusing him. And we see Herod's heart. He wasn't actually hoping to meet God. Because then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and they mocked Jesus. And they dressed him up in an elegant robe and they sent him back to Pilate. You see, he said no to Herod's mocking demands. And it did, in this case, have an opportunity cost that was negative. When he said no to Herod, he got ridiculed. He ends up getting beat. But he says, that's worth it. I'm not going to answer this hurtful person. And he ends up getting hurt by this guy. But he says no to this person's demands. As a Christian, you have permission to say no to haters and hurters. Not suspending love, but extending it by saying no to them. Several times in my life, I've had to say no to people that were super negative, super hurtful, because the opportunity cost wasn't worth it. It was too great. And as I started to think about it, my constantly saying yes to their demands and their needs, it was enabling that kind of bad behavior. And so by picking up their call, and then they would scream and be mad and hateful towards me, even as a pastor, and I'd say all bad language. And people, when they're on drugs, they tend to do this a lot, and I have lots of drug friends. And so they would scream and scream and scream. And then for a long time, I listened to them and I cared. And I'd go meet them and that kind of stuff. And after a while, I said, what I'm just doing is enabling this really bad behavior. And it's hurting my soul and my life as well. I'm not doing ministry to these people. I'm causing them to be able to have this outlet event. And they think that it's okay to treat people that way. And so there are times where I've had to say, no, I'm not going to meet you. You're not sober. I'm not going to meet you right now. There's nothing that I could say that would benefit you. And so there are times when saying no to hateful people. And even to the point where I'm not going to answer your calls anymore, I'm not going to meet you until God does a work in you, because it's not helpful to you and it's not helpful to me. And so you are free to say no to this world's pressures so that you can say yes to God's pleasures. That's quote number 2 for the day. Strive for the important, strive for the God-pleasing, and say no to everything else. Say no to all the stuff that's not God stuff and is not important stuff. Say no to it. And that's, every one of us is different. So let's have a conversation with God and say, God, what's important? Help me to say yes to the important stuff, God, and to say no to everything else. Would you join me in sort of praying that over with God? God, I struggle with this sometimes, God, too, because I feel as a pastor I have to say yes a lot. But I always want to say yes to the right things, God. I want to say yes to your things. I want to say yes to your purpose in my life, your call for me. And I know this is selfish sort of end prayer right now, but God, I got to do that first. And I pray, God, this church would allow me the freedom to say no, too. Not no, I don't love them, but yes, I love them, but no to different things. I pray they're not mad that I said no because I don't want to go to the retreat because I don't like it. But I pray that they're forgiving and loving to me too. Would you have a conversation with God right now about the things that are important? Would you ask him to strengthen you to say no when the time is to say no? And how to see rightly when the time to say yes is? Would you ask him what area is stirring in your heart right now to passionately serve in, so that you could say no to everything else and focus in on that thing? What is it that God is calling you to? Say yes to him